The major news media uses numbers from organizations controlled by Hamas for the count of Palestinians killed in Gaza. Many analysts say those figures are way too high, ridiculously high. They also say the inflated number of civilian deaths is being used as a propaganda tool against Israel. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Tragically, uninvolved Palestinians have died in the more than 200-day war Hamas began on October 7th.
Of course, we have to start by saying that every human being whose life is lost is a terrible tragedy, and we're all created in the image of God.
Gil Hoffman, director of Honest Reporting, a media watchdog group, recently published an investigative report on how Hamas has inflated the number of civilian casualties in Gaza.
Terrorists are not journalists. They're not people who should be trusted. And their numbers that they're putting out are part of their propaganda game to try to win the world's sympathy, and it's unfortunately working.
The Gaza Ministry of Health, overseen by Hamas, publishes those numbers. Currently, its death toll reporting stands at more than 35,000. Hoffman says those numbers have been parroted throughout the war by world leaders, including President Biden, and global media like the Associated Press.
You know, the world media, they try to be balanced. So Israel says this. Israel says that based on the studies taken by the world's top experts on urban warfare, Israel set a gold standard in preventing the loss of civilian life. So they put out our side. And then the other side, they put out, well, Hamas says that Israel is committing genocide. It doesn't work that way.
Professor of Statistics Abraham Weiner from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania wrote how the Gaza Ministry of Health fakes casualty numbers. The data scientist studied Hamas statistics from the war's beginning using a graph and concluded, here's the problem with this data. The numbers are not real. That much is obvious to anyone who understands how naturally occurring numbers work. The casualties are not overwhelmingly women and children, and the majority may be Hamas fighters. This data also does not include the estimated 14,000 Hamas fighters killed in combat, or Palestinians killed by misfired rockets, estimated by some to be nearly 1,000. The Foundation for the Defense of Democracies also reported this month that the Gaza Health Ministry cannot provide names for more than 10,000 it says have died.
We previously knew they had incomplete records for this set of people of at least 10,000, but from both Wall Street Journal reporting and from an item on the ministry's own social media feed, they've indicated they don't have names, so they can't really identify these individuals. It's really one more drop in a bucket on a broader credibility issue.
Asnick also noted the Gaza Ministry of Health got its information from unidentified, quote, reliable media sources.
At first, that was only about 22%, but then it became an increasing percentage over time. So we got to a point where nearly 45% of the alleged deceased were based on these media reports.
In the latest revision, the UN published a report that reduced the number of women and children killed in the war by nearly half. They clarified later that their overall estimate of the number killed in the war remains the same. They explain the revision to the fog of war. It's not the only example of suspected death tolls. Near the beginning of the war, the media reported Israel killed 500 at the al-Ahli hospital. Later, it was discovered a misfired rocket by Islamic Jihad killed far less civilians in the next-door parking lot. Abu Shlouf, the spokesperson for Islamic Jihad, admitted it was a lie.
Yes, in order to erase this story, the organization made several moves. It fabricated a story that the rocket belonged to the occupation and the target was a hospital building. They relied on some of the stories of the international press.
And after that, they published it to the whole world?
Yes.
First of all, I acknowledge that sadly, there are civilians, non-combatants that have been killed in battle. Sadly, and that is not the intention of the IDF. I think the IDF has gone to tremendous lengths in order to minimize the amount of non-combatants that have been affected by this war. And I, as a human being, I regret any civilian who loses his life as a part of a fight that they didn't start.
Former IDF spokesman Jonathan Conricus, now with the FDD, says Hamas has rigged the battlefield.
We must remember who embeds himself within the civilian population and abuses everything that is supposed to be protected under international law. Hospitals, schools, mosques, UN facilities, infirmaries, and everything else. The organization that does that is Hamas. And had Hamas chosen to fight out in the open, and not to use civilians as human shields, not to tunnel underneath civilian neighborhoods, and not to hide behind civilian infrastructure, then of course there wouldn't be any civilian casualties.
Despite Hamas using human shields, according to military historian John Spencer, the ratio of civilian deaths to combatants is near historic lows for urban warfare. Even so, Hoffman says, regrettably, the charge of genocide has spread worldwide into the streets and across social media.
That ridiculous accusation for a war that started with the Hamas sending people into Israel to kill as many Jews as they could, and Israel doing everything possible to minimize civilian deaths. And unfortunately, that accusation is still out there, and that's just anti-Semitic to accuse Israel of that when the facts are just so obvious to be the opposite.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Mark Twain said famously that a lie can go around the world before the truth has time to put its pants on. That's exactly what's happening here. If you remember that rocket, the supposed Israeli rocket that targeted a hospital, none other than the New York Times ran that story with the death toll of 500. And they talked about there was hospital patients being killed by Israel in a targeted strike against a hospital. You look at that, and then you find out the source of the story was the Gaza Ministry of Health, which sounds like some official organization. But you dive deeper into it, and it's a propaganda arm of Hamas. Now, within Islam, and many people don't know this one, but within Islam, it's perfectly legal, it's perfectly acceptable to lie to infidels. So you can't expect them to tell the truth. They are trying to gain an advantage in world opinion. And they've been remarkably successful at it. How many times have you heard the death toll of 30,000, 33,000, now 35,000? When you get a professor of statistics saying, well, look at the graph, numbers don't come this way. This doesn't ever happen in the world. These are manufactured numbers. And then you start wondering, well, what in the world? Why aren't news organizations questioning the Gaza Ministry of Health? That these can't possibly be real numbers. It doesn't add up, it doesn't make sense, but they seem to want to repeat it again and again and again. And that's the goal of propaganda. We're in a world where truth has been turned upside down. The very people who want to commit genocide, Hamas wants to commit genocide. They have vowed to wipe out Israel. They have vowed to kill every Jew in Israel. These are facts. This isn't made up. These are facts. They want to do that. That is genocide. And it was clear to the entire world what their intent was on October 7th. You see it, they acted on it, they did it, they have vowed to do it again and again. Who's being accused of genocide now? Is it Hamas? No. Israel is being accused as they defend themselves, as they try to get their own citizens freed, the hostages set free, as they try to stop the rocket attacks, as they try to say to a terrorist group, no more, you don't get to do this to us ever again. You vowed to do it again and again, no more. We can't exist as a nation under that kind of threat. In all of this, we see campus protests, we see international courts trying to throw war crime accusations at Israel. It's a world turned upside down. Now, here's something you can do. Every time you see a news report claiming that number from the Gaza Ministry of Health, look for it. Then write a letter to the editor. let your voice be heard, put something into the comment line, call them out on it and say, no, you're repeating a lie. You haven't done proper investigation. This isn't journalism. You are repeating propaganda, and it shouldn't happen. If we, as consumers of news, stand up and say, not on our watch, you don't get to lie to us again and again and again, please start telling the truth, you'll get a reaction. You'll get a reaction at the highest level of every news organization. So please do that. Let's stand with Israel. Here's a very practical way you can do it. Let your voice be heard.